welcome to another edition of One on One. I'm Rich Wells, the Public Information Officer for the City of Glendale. Well, the 16th Annual Glendale Cruise Night Car Show and Street Party is just around the block, and this year's event promises to be one of the biggest ever. The 2009 version of Cruise Night will feature over 400 classic cars and trucks on display, live music and displays, and games for the kids. Coordinating this year's entertainment and serving as this year's MC will be radio legend Beirne, Mr. Rock and Roll. Brian is joining us today to talk about this year's event and share some of his stories from his days on the radio. Brian, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Rich. Pleasure.
Now, you are coordinating this year's entertainment for Cruise Night. This is your fourth year with the City of Glendale in doing so.
Right.
You really enjoy doing this type of work, don't you?
I love doing this.
Now, we've had some great performers in past years. Peter Noon, of course, last year with Herman's Hermits.
Boy, that was a tremendous show. We've had the Tokens with The Lion Sleeps Tonight, the Marcells with Blue Moon, Freddie Boom Boom Cannon with Palisades Park, the Kingsmen with Louie Louie, guys that I grew up with, the Mermaids with Popsicles and Icicles, Shantays with Pipeline, the Safaris with Wipeout. Probably missed a couple down the line, but
it's a good lineup as it is.
We've had a lot of fun.
Now, this year, of course, I think is going to be another great performance. Who will be lined up?
Well, we start with the four preps, Southern California guys from Hollywood High School, and of course they made, I think, 40 appearances on the old Ozzie and Harriet show, and famous for a place I hope you've been, to Catalina, 26 miles across the sea. Santa Catalina's waiting for me, and the guys are vocally stunning, and they're back at it, so they'll open the show. Then we've got the Jan and Dean show featuring Dean Torrance, all the great Southern California beach hits, Surf City, and of course the car sound. So they were such a great part of the Southern California culture, with Little Old Lady from Pasadena, Drag City, and so many more. And then we top it off with Sha Na Na, celebrating their 40th anniversary, and also the 40th anniversary of their great appearance at Woodstock.
Let's talk about that for a second. These guys, 40 years ago, appear at Woodstock, and it just launches their career, didn't it?
It did. They appeared right before Jimi Hendrix and just blew the place away. And it was really, you know, nobody had seen anything like that in some years. It was a reemergence, if you will, of the 50s sound. And here you've got Joe Cocker and Hendrix and all of this sort of rock, and then you've got some guys coming on that just do plain old rock and roll and blow the place away. So,
and they still put on a real high energy show, don't they?
They do. They're terrific. Interestingly enough, that was, I think, only their third appearance that they had done. They'd done 3 small gigs at that point, and I think they wound up, after expenses were paid, making about $5 on the on the Woodstock event. But it really did launch their career. I met them about 3 or 4 weeks later in San Francisco. I was working in San Francisco at the time, and Bill Graham, who owned the famous Fillmore Auditorium, called me and said, "I want you to come down and see this act, because I think you're going to really like them." And they were the opening act for the Kinks, and nobody stayed around for the Kinks because they blew the place away at the Fillmore.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. To think they usurped the Kinks.
Yes, especially at that period of time.
Right. Right. Now, Dean Torrance is still working with a new band. He sounds
actually, it's a lot of the guys from the old Jan and Dean band, and a lot of the guys that used to play in the Beach Boy band. So, I mean, they've got this down, and it's it sounds like the old Jan and Dean records and the original sound. So, that's a great high energy show, and I won't spoil it because they do some fun things in their show, as Sha Na Na will. That will be a surprise for the audience.
And the 4 preps are still going strong.
Yes, they are. Yeah, we've been out on the road with the guys, and the original lead singer, Bruce Belland, is there with the preps. Bob Duncan, who used to be with the Diamonds for 20 years, and a couple of guys who used to be with the Crew Cuts. So it's a wonderful vocal harmony sound.
Now, you do this really throughout the year, Brian. You go to different locations and coordinate entertainment. What's that like?
Well, it's a lot of fun, especially all these guys, of course, I've known pretty much for the last 40-plus years. They all did my radio show down through the years, and you know, the majority of them became good personal friends of mine. So it's always fun, and it's always fun to work with the guys. You hardly ever work with a bad apple, and if you do, then I don't work with them again. But we have a lot of fun, and it's in many instances, and especially like this particular event, some of the guys never had a chance to work with one another down through the years. So it's like, gee, I always wanted to work with the Kingsmen, or I always wanted to work with Sean Adna or the Four Preps.
Right.
So it's a lot of fun backstage for us as well.
One thing that amazed me last year when word got out that Peter Noon was coming of Hermit's fame, I started getting emails from a lot of the baby boomers in the area who just said, I've always wanted to see Peter Noon. And that night, I remember I was up on stage taking some pictures, and the crowd was just, he had them in the palm of his hand.
Yeah, I've worked with Peter for, well, shoot, I think I did the Hermits tour in '66 with him, and it's a far better show today. It is so polished, and he is such a wonderful guy and a great entertainer, and an awful lot of hit records.
Yeah. Oh yeah. A lot. Now, in addition to the great entertainment, of course, Cruise Night has become probably one of the premier car shows in Southern California.
Definitely.
It really is one of the best, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I think we'll have maybe close to 450 cars this year, and I mean, there's some beauties out there, and a lot of money in these.
Now, you used to have some nice cars of your own.
I did. As a matter of fact, last year when I walked down the boulevard, most of the time I spend behind the stage or on the stage, but had a chance to walk down, and I saw a '57 T-Bird that was mine.
It used to be your T-Bird.
It used to be my car, and I know that because there was a little detail in the back right fin that I could never get out of there, and I don't think this gentleman who bought it ever got it out of there either. But I looked at that and I said, that used to be my car.
Now we have a celebrity judge this year that people will, of course, recognize.
I think so. I think if the name Pat Boone doesn't ring a bell, then you've been out of touch. And talk about hit records. Boy, here's a guy that put 60 records on the charts over the years, 26 of those in the top 20, 18 top 10s, hard to beat that, wow, and 6 number 1s. Plus, of course, he was in 15 motion pictures.
Right.
So
right. Now he'll be judging the cars, but he might also just wander up on stage. Is that right?
I think there's a good possibility he's going to be on stage. He'll certainly be on stage with me, and I think that we have a surprise later on in the evening. Plus, I was talking with Pat yesterday, and he's going to bring one of his classic cars.
Oh, great. Great. Well, Brian, Cruise Night all together, you put the entertainment together, the cars, and of course it's just a great family event. And I know you've told me in the past that a lot of the entertainers who do come to Cruise Night really talk positively about this event and how much they enjoy playing here.
Yes, every single one of them. I mean, they just can't believe what a beautiful event this is, how many people, what a clean, structured event it is, and what a great family event. I mean, many of the guys have taken the opportunity after sound check to walk down and see the cars themselves, because the majority of them are also, like all of us, car buffs. But I mean, it's a great family event. I mean, just the perfect family event, and as you said, I mean, really one of the premier car shows.
Well, and
in the entire state.
It's been a real positive boom for the restaurants and all the businesses down on Brand Boulevard too. And it's the kind of event that everybody enjoys coming to. We've always had nice weather, and hopefully this year again we'll have some nice weather.
I think so, and I've certainly enjoyed being a part of it and building it for the last 4 years, and it's been great fun.
Well, Brian, I want to talk a little bit more about your days in radio and some of the folks you've known during your days in rock and roll. We're going to take a break first, though. We'll be back with more one-on-one right after this.
Glendale, it's time to save water. We are currently experiencing one of the driest seasons on record. Yet this dry season can serve as an opportunity for all of us to take part in water conservation. Just by making minor changes outdoors in the way we use water can save gallons of water a day. For example, position sprinklers so that the water lands on the lawn and shrubs, not on sidewalks or driveways. Step on your grass. If it springs back, you don't need to water. Water when temperatures are cooler. Sweep driveways and sidewalks instead of hosing them. Use a bucket and shut-off nozzle on the hose when washing your car. Saving water is simple. Working together, we can achieve our water conservation goal to reduce water usage by 10%. That's about 20 gallons of water per person a day.
After 8 years of research and planning, the Bob Hope Airport has submitted a proposal seeking to ban nighttime operations. The FAA's final ruling on this proposal, called a Part 161 study, will be made by November the 1st. We are now in the FAA's 30-day public comment period, the community's opportunity to communicate its desire for a mandatory nighttime curfew. Contact your elected officials in Washington and the FAA in support of the airport's curfew proposal.
We have a water shortage. So why do we continue to waste water? With leaky sprinklers, or by hosing down our driveways instead of sweeping them, and by taking anything longer than a 5-minute shower. Southern California is getting drier. Go to BeWaterWise.com. Find out how your community is dealing with mandatory conservation, and learn 6 things we can all do to move the needle.
Hi, and welcome back to One-on-One. Today we're talking with Brian Beirne. He is the MC for this year's Cruise Night Car Show and Street Party. He also is helping us coordinate the entertainment for this year's program. Brian, we were talking in the first half a little bit about our performers this year, and I understand that Sha Na Na is actually coming out with a new CD this year.
Yes, they have a 40th anniversary CD, and they're also going to be part of the new DVD out on Woodstock, and I think they'll probably have both available. As a matter of fact, the CD comes out 2 days before Cruise Night, so
oh, great. It'll
be fresh off the press and ready for the folks.
Well, and as we were mentioning in the first half, Sha Na Na, the Jan and Dean Show, the 4 Preps, it's going to be a great year.
And Pat Boone, and you'll also get autographs with the guys. Everybody will be there,
right?
And Pat's going to come and do autographs, and there'll be merchandise, and get a chance to come and meet your favorite stars.
Now, as we mentioned earlier, you go around and you work with these entertainers year-round, but before this, you were in radio for many years.
About 107 years.
About 107 years. Sometimes it seemed like it, right?
Oh, it does.
Talk a little bit about how you got your start in radio, Brian, and some of the great things that you've seen during your years in broadcasting.
Well, music was always an interest for me. I think by the time I was about 4 and I started going around the neighborhood with my little radio flyer wagon and collecting records. I asked people if they had any old records they wanted to get rid of, because I was fascinated by music and records, which eventually grew to a record collection of 40,000.
40,000.
40,000. Got a little out of hand over the years, but
it's like, where do you put 40,000 records?
A big, big room. So, and you have to have a really good wife to put up with it, but unfortunately I do. But I was fascinated by music. I took up piano, and then, when Elvis hit, when I was a kid, I wanted to play guitar just like Elvis. And my dad took me into a radio station one day when I was 10, and I watched a guy, and I thought, boy, this is for me. And I get to talk about the records, play the records, and he said the magic words, "Kid, there's a box underneath the console here, and when it goes off the playlist, you get to take the records home." And I said, this is it.
The bug got you, huh?
Yeah. I started hanging around radio stations after that, 3-4 days a week, and just watching the guys to see how they queued up the records and what they did, and became kind of a little gopher at the station. And then one night I was 13, and they were doing a live broadcast from the YWCA on Saturday nights that they would do once a month, and I was a little too shy to go dance with the girls and, pimples and all that. And so I'd hang around with the jock, and about a half hour into the show, he said, "I'm sick, I'm going home. You take it." I said, "What do you mean, me take it? I'm a 13-year-old kid." He says, "You know how to run the board." He says, "Finish the show." So next thing I knew, I finished the show, and they offered me a little Saturday night show, which I did for a while until my mother suggested I not do that because I might get in trouble with girls. And I said, no, I won't. Please, Mom. But I went back to work 4 years later at 17 and was nonstop for 40 plus years after that.
Wow. Now this was, I think you said Oregon where you started.
This was in Oregon. And of course, if you want to be in radio, you move around. Keep that U-Haul packed and see the USA with your Chevrolet.
Right.
So we did a lot of markets, did Salem, Eugene, Seattle, Sacramento 3 times, San Francisco twice, Chicago, Cleveland, and then found my niche in Los Angeles at KRITH 101 where I spent 29 years.
And that's a record, if I'm not mistaken.
That was the record nationally for the longest run doing middays at one station.
How was it working in Los Angeles? I mean, that's probably one of the biggest markets in the United States. It had to be a lot of fun.
It was great, and the listeners were great. And it's if you find that niche, I mean, I was very fortunate to just find the right format, which I loved, and a chance for me to talk about the artists and the history of rock and roll, and have the artists in. And do my lunchtime show, which we did, and we had everybody and their brother on, from Elton John to Connie Francis, Chubby Checker. I mean, you name it. We did hundreds and hundreds of acts on the show over the years, and that's just been really a great amount of fun.
Now, you, in addition to working at KRITH, you also did the Legends shows at the Greek Theater, right?
Yeah, I started the Legends of Rock and Roll. We did that for 12 years at the Greek Theater, where we'd have 12 to 15 acts on a show a night. We did over 120 different artists in that 12-year span. Just about anybody that had a hit record down through the years, a lot of one-hit wonders. Restarted a lot of careers, people that had not performed in years that I found that I said, come back and do this one more time.
Right.
And that was really heartwarming to start a lot of people's careers who, they were down on their luck or had been out of the business for years, had become sour because they never got paid for a million seller that they had. You sell 6 million records and never get a dime. A lot of guys got soured on the business, and I wanted to bring those people back. Plus, on the West Coast, in those days, we didn't get a lot of artists through. We didn't get a lot of the tours. Most of them were in the Midwest to the East, in the Alan Freed days where the big shows were. So I wanted to structure this like those shows that they got in Brooklyn with Alan Freed, where you'd have all these acts. Of course, they were all brand new then. But essentially do the same thing here. You never got a chance to see, for example, the Fleetwoods, who did our very first show. They never had a chance to tour. So you only saw some of these acts on American Bandstand. So it was wonderful to go out and find them and bring them back and have them do it.
Right. Well, you have had a chance to meet a lot of performers during the years, Brian, and I wanted to just for a few minutes go down memory lane with you on some of the performers you've had a chance to work with, and maybe some personal stories you have about them. I thought I'd just throw out a couple names and just let you fire away. Let's start off with Southern California, Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys.
Met Brian and the guys 1966 on a tour, and did several dates with them. Done a lot of shows with them down through the years, and Brian, of course, has been a good friend. He gave me the first interview when he was making his comeback in the 70s, after he'd come out of his sandbox, if you will, and all of that. And so it gave me the first radio interview.
Jerry Lee Lewis.
What a character. Done several shows with him. He is, if you sat down one-on-one over a cup of coffee, he is a character, but a completely different man off stage than he is on stage. I mean, a fabulous performer. With Jerry, like Sinatra was, you never know from night to night who's going to show up. Is he going to give a half-hour performance, an hour performance? Is he going to be great? Is he going to do just a walkthrough? Most interesting thing we were having dinner one night in Memphis, and I said, and I always like to ask the performers questions that probably no other interviewer would ask them, and not just the run-of-the-mill, how did this hit come about? And I said, who did you really want to be when you started? And he stopped and he said, nobody's ever asked me that. He said, I actually wanted to be Al Jolson. He said, I would rather sing ballads and sing that type of material than do what I do.
No kidding.
So it's kind of interesting.
Interesting.
He said, I loved Al Jolson and I loved Hank Williams. And he said, when I saw Hank, he said, that moved me to this direction, and I kind of, just let it all happen.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't think of a guy like Jerry Lee Lewis and Al Jolson together.
Yeah, you wouldn't. The Rolling Stones.
Some real characters. Worked the 66 tour with the Stones. Great performers, really know how to still do it.
Chuck Berry.
Another character. Chuck is a lot of stories on Chuck. Probably the guy that had, if you were to take one songwriter from that whole period, he really had the pulse beat of the American teenager through that whole period. Great songs that will just live forever. And with Chuck also, here's a guy, you don't know whether you're going to get a good performance out of Chuck or a bad performance. All depends on how Chuck got up that day. And he sets his watch. He gives you 60 minutes. And if he's in the middle of a song, he's walking off stage.
That's it.
That's just Chuck. I asked him one night, I said, can you autograph this picture to the wife? He says, sure. So he puts to the wife and hands it back to me. We're in a hotel one night doing a gig years ago, and we're going up the elevator to the ballroom, and Chuck says, my guitar, where's my guitar? I said, you're holding it, Chuck. He said, oh. So I said, boy, this is going to be one heck of a night tonight.
Elton John.
Elton did my radio show a number of times. One of the interesting things that he told me was, he said, I was so obsessed with American rock and roll. He said, I could not get enough. He said, Fats Domino, Elvis, Ricky. He said, this was Buddy Holly. He said, I wanted to be Elvis. That was what I wanted to be. And I wanted to just take a little piece of all of these guys and structure myself to be that. But he said, I couldn't wait for the new songs to come out. He said, because you guys you had it.
Ricky Nelson.
Ricky was a dear friend. We were actually set to do a tour in Japan shortly thereafter when he went down in the plane. I think you were to take a look at the list of the greats, I don't think he's really still gotten his due as a performer. I think a lot of people looked at him as the kid on television rather than the singer that he was. He loved being on stage. I mean, he would be on stage every night. He said, that's where I want to be. And of course, if we didn't have Ricky and the Stone Canyon Band, we wouldn't have had the offshoots to get to Poco and the Eagles and all of that. Right. I mean, he was really ahead of the curve. And of course, when he did Garden Party and had the long hair and went out, he was moving that whole sound to that direction where the Eagles would eventually go. And people wouldn't accept him. They wanted that teenage idol look to look like Ricky Nelson. And of course, unfortunately, when he passed away, he was back on that tour and doing dates with Fats and the Jordanaires behind him, and it was just like the old days. Right. It was great.
Fats Domino.
I've known Fats since 1957.
Wow.
I was just a kid, and this was Salem, Oregon, and Fats came into town to play this adult dance club. And in those days, of course, this was before the days of the big sheds, Rich, like the Greek theaters or the Universal Amphitheaters or the forums and all of this. Biggest thing in town was going to be a high school auditorium, an armory, a roller rink, and that's where performers played.
Right.
You tell this to people now, and they look at you like, you know, you're from Mars, but that really was all that you had. So Fats was playing this club, and I said to my mother, I've got to meet Fats Domino. I mean, this is rock and roll, Mom. I mean, rock and roll was hitting. And she said, it's an adult club. And my mother had previously owned the building where this club was. And I said, well, can't you call up the guy that you sold the building to? And she says, well, I guess. But she says, I don't know how I'm going to get you in there. She said, it's an adult dance club. I said, well, let's give it a shot. So she managed to do this. And I met Fats, and he was just coming off of a set, and he asked me, he said, do you play piano? And I said, yeah. He says, do you know Blueberry Hill? And I'm walking. And I said, yeah. He said, okay. He says, you stay here, little Bryant. He called me Bryant, and still does. And he brought me up on stage. Now, in those days, as many folks know, race was an issue. And this was a town where race was an issue. And to see a 10-year-old kid on stage with a person of color, there was going to be trouble. And I remember looking out and watching two ladies in the back faint. I mean, just faint dead away when I'm on stage with Fats Domino playing piano. The police were called, and my mother and I were escorted out of the building. My mother said to me, bless her heart, she says, you know, nobody's going to speak to us in this town for 6 months. Wow. She said, I'm a business owner here, and she says, we're going to be in big trouble now. Years later, I went up to Reno, and Fats had not done, and this is 1968, 69, Fats had not been on the West Coast since then. And I went backstage, and I said, do you remember the last time you played here? And you brought a little boy up on stage with you in Salem? He said, yeah. I said, well, I'm that little boy all growing up.
Oh,
so,
that's been something.
Yeah, and then we worked together many times after that. I had a chance to book him places and work with him. And absolutely one of the dearest people of all that I've ever met in the business. Just, I mean, he would always just take out a handful of money and say, Brian, do you need any money? Or you and your family need anything? Just a sweetheart.
You had mentioned how Chuck Berry really, he had captured the moment in rock and roll with what he was writing at that time. Who were some of the more outstanding performers that you worked with? I mean, who would you say, wow, this guy or this group is just amazing?
Well, Jerry Lee, I mean, when he's on, is always a great performance. Elvis, boy, I mean, I saw Elvis a number of times. I was fortunate to see him in 57 at the height of it all, and at the end, which, you know, it was the great American success story and the great American tragedy, all rolled into one. But, boy, seeing him in 57 at the height of the Elvis mania was something else. And in the early days when he was first back in the early 70s, I used to love to take people who hated Elvis to an Elvis concert and just watch them get chills. And I mean, he was a terrific performer. Sinatra, again, a guy that I saw Frank probably 22 times. And Frank was different every time, depending upon if he was with his wife or with his pals, if he was on the road somewhere, or if he was in Vegas where he had his own entourage with him. I saw the only night that he ever did an encore, and that was really something. He was his last night at the casino. Curtain had closed, and people got up, started walking out, and we were sitting in the front row, and you heard Frank, "Open the curtain. Somebody get me a drink." He walked out and said to the band, "Sit down." He said, "What do you people want to hear? Where are you going?" Took requests for 25 minutes.
No kidding.
Had never done it. Elvis and Frank never did encores. And I ran into Tom Dreesen, his comic was with him for years, the next day on the plane. And Tom said, "Did you see the show?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "We were just aghast at this." He said, "Frank doesn't do encores." I said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, last night here, and the jack hit him, and he said he was just, he thought it was 1957, and he was just having a great time, didn't want to quit." And we had seen him the night before, and he was okay, but not like that night. And so again, that was, a person who would interpret the songs the way he felt that night. I mean, you could watch his eyes go, and if he was into Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered, and you could see him going back to thinking about Ava Gardner, and just one of those nights where he is someplace else when he's singing that song. So as a stylist, it was always wonderful to watch somebody like that work.
Now you had told me a story where I guess you almost met Buddy Holly. You came very close, but it didn't quite work out. Is that right?
Well, we were pretty close, and as I mentioned to you, I was always interested in music and kind of a young entrepreneur. But I looked at, my mother had a speedway, a racetrack for auto racing, and I looked at the infield one day, and I said, "Gee, wait a minute, this would be a perfect spot for a concert. Plus, we have more seats here at the Speedway than any other place in town." So I said, "Why don't we have a rock concert out here? We have rock and roll." I mean, I'm thinking of killing two birds with one stone. I get to meet some performers, plus, we make a little money.
Right.
So my mother had called Buddy Holly's management, and they said, "Yeah, we're thinking about doing a spring tour on the West Coast," and so forth. And this was the fall of 1958. We'll get back to you in the springtime when we put something all together. And of course, what happened in February of '59. So close.
Meet him. Anybody else who you wish you would have met along the way?
Would like to have seen Eddie Cochran and Gene Vincent. Missed those three. Everybody else I was fortunate to probably have seen or worked with. The hundreds of people down through the years, even on into the 80s. But as far as original guys, those would probably be the three that I would like to have seen or worked with. The innovators.
The innovators. Brian, rock and roll has changed so much over the years. What are your thoughts? I mean, do you miss the old rock and roll?
Sure. I mean, there was rock and roll in its original form. I mean, it moved from rhythm and blues into what morphed into rock and roll, and then what I call the period of rock, where you got the Stones and all of this, excuse me, that we moved into the 60s and the harder classical rock. There's nothing like the good old rock and roll and the fun. These were all 2-minute records, and it was all about fun. It was all about love and romance. You look at the ballads of Earth Angel, and how many great ballads are there today? And look what we had back then.
Right.
So, music has changed, of course, and like anything else, it evolves and changes down through the years. And it always is a reflection also of our society and where we're headed. I think we've gotten, unfortunately, a lot harder, meaner. We are less communicative with one another as a society. Today, it's call your voicemail rather than talk to one another. Right. And all of this is reflected in music and how hard. You look at some of the rap that we have today, which is violent. It's anti-women, anti-police, anti-everything. So it's a negative view when you have stuff like that.
And radio has gone through tremendous change as well.
Oh, right? Tremendous. Just technically, when I look back at what I started when I was first in radio, and we were, queuing up little reels of tape or recording commercials onto a disc. And I remember the boss saying, "Hey, it's $1 a disc. Make sure you get it in one take." So yeah, you got good real quick.
Yeah.
And I remember, our last board that we worked here on K-Earth, it looks like the control board of a 747. So.
Well, and I think you mentioned to me recently too, a lot of the folks who you worked with over the years are losing their jobs. It's going through a tremendous change.
Tremendous
right now.
change. There's a tremendous downsizing, and one of the reasons, of course, is the fact that you had the mom and pop days where you could only own a couple of radio stations, to the deregulation where you could own as many radio stations as you want, and you have 4 or 5 companies that own everything. And now you're going to see a reversal of that just because of the economic times.
Brian, I'm sure you have a multitude of memories of your days working in radio and with these artists. Anything that sticks out in your mind? Any favorite memories that you have that you want to share?
Boy, there's so many, from the days of being first on the radio and the Kingsmen with Louie, working as a house band up the road from where I was, and then bringing the acetates down to me saying, "Hey, we just cut this this morning, and what do you think?" and sticking it on the radio. A lot of people that I've been fortunate to work with down through the years, the hundreds of people, and the many of them that became really good friends, and of course many that have gone to rock and roll heaven now that I miss, Ricky and so many others. But one of my classmates, when I went back to my high school reunion, said, "Boy, you've been really fortunate to live out your childhood dream," which I was. I was, good Lord blessed me with a voice and the ability to do this and to use it. And hopefully down through the years that people came away from the radio show learning something and having a good day from what I gave them. Enjoyed every minute that I was on the radio for the 40 plus years. That was always a thrill to go in, and of course you were playing the record for the 4 millionth time, so the idea was to reintroduce it a little bit different this time, or a different story, or something that came up, and just so many memories. I think one of the most enjoyable times I had was doing the Legends of Rock and Roll show. And also, doing Cruise Night, where I have a chance to bring in some great entertainment and people that I think that the audience here at Cruise Night will really enjoy. The careers that we had a chance to restart at the Greek. Ed Townsend, who did For Your Love, one of the great ballads. Ed was in really bad shape when I found him. I'd known him since the days in Chicago, and I said, "I want you to come back and do the show." He said, "If I do the show, I got to quit drinking." I said, "Well, you have to quit drinking." He said, "I'll tell you what, buy me one last drink and I'll quit drinking." I said, "It's a deal." He called me every day for the next 3 months, quit drinking, went out and just killed the place. And he, of course, wrote and produced Let's Get It On for Marvin Gaye, did a lot of great Motown producing. And because I brought him back, he restarted his career as a record producer. He's since passed away, but a dear gentleman. And, he's just so thankful that he had an opportunity to go back and restart his life all over again. And we did that with several people. And that was, for me, I stood in the wings and got tears in my eyes. It was just a wonderful moment.
Brian, once again, we have a great lineup this year for our Cruise Night Car Show and Street Party. Sha Na Na, the Jan and Dean Show featuring Dean Torrance, and of course the 4 Preps. You'll be emceeing again this year.
I will, and Pat Boone will be there.
Right.
We'll have autographs. We'll have a lot of fun and some surprises, and certainly urge everybody to come out. Bring the family. It is a great night. You're going to see cars like something else.
Well, Brian, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us today. And sharing your memories with us of rock and roll and radio. It's been a great walk down memory lane.
Thank you, Rich. Thanks for having me. And as I used to say, the sign off on my radio show, thanks for being on the show.
And thank you for joining us for another edition of One on One. We'll see you next time.